Hello, chess fans! This is Rick from Chess to Impress, continuing the build-up towards the resumption of the 2020 Candidates Tournament, which was cut short because of the corona pandemic back in March. On Chess to Impress, we're counting down towards the restart on Sunday, November 1st by looking at the earlier 29 candidate cycles in the history of the World Championship. It started in London in 1883, a long time ago, where Zukertort and Steinitz finished in the first two places, and they played the first official World Championship match 3 years later. In St. Petersburg 1895-1896, Steinitz gained the right to challenge world champion Lasker for a rematch. Paul Keres from Estonia won the candidate cycle in Netherlands 1938. He never got a World Championship match though, because of World War II interfering. The first official candidates tournament was held in Budapest and Moscow in 1950. David Bronstein was the winner. Vasily Smyslov won two candidate cycles, Zurich 1953 and Amsterdam 1956. Misha Tal won Yugoslavia 1959 and it was his turn to challenge Mikhail Botvinnik for the world title. He defeated Botvinnik 1 year later and became world champion. Tigran Petrosyan won the next cycle, and Boris Spassky won two cycles in 1965 and 1968. Bobby Fischer beat everybody in the next candidate cycle to qualify for a World Championship match against Spassky. We have it there in red because we're going to look at a game from that cycle in this video. Anatoly Karpov came on the scene in 1974. He beat Viktor Korchnoi in the candidate final, qualified for a match against Fischer. That match unfortunately never happened. Karpov became the 12th world champion. Viktor Korchnoi won two candidate cycles, lost twice to Karpov. And Kasparov came on the scene by winning the next candidate cycle and becoming world champion 1 year later. Karpov came back, won two cycles for matches 4 and 5 against Kasparov, and in 1993 Nigel Short gained the right to challenge Kasparov. Anand was Kasparov's next challenger, and Alexei Shirov should have been the next one to play against Kasparov. He beat Kramnik in Cazorla in 1998, but never got a match. Kramnik did. He beat Kasparov in 2000 and became the 14th world champion. Peter Leko was Kramnik's first challenger, and in Elista 2007 we had a qualifier for a world championship tournament. Aranyan, Gelfand, Grishuk and Leko qualified. Anand became world champion. Anand's next opponents were Topalov, Gelfand and Carlsen. Carlsen dethroned Anand, became the 16th world champion. Anand won Gantiman Siegs 2014 for a rematch against Carlsen. Carlsen won again, and his next two challengers were Karyakin and Kairana. Who will it be? Yekaterinburg 2020. It's all going to start very soon, and then we'll know who will be Magnus Carlsen's next challenger. But we're going back to the 1970-1971 cycle. The Interzonal was held in Palma de Mallorca on the Canary Islands. In November and December 1970, the top 6 players of the Interzonal qualified for the Candidates Tournament. Bobby Fischer had not qualified to play in this event as he had not participated in the 1969 US Championships, which was the qualifier, the zonal tournament for this interzonal. However, Paul Benko and the reserve Bill Lombardi gave up his spot, and FIDE President Max Euwe, the 5th world champion, controversially allowed Fischer to participate instead. A compensation of $1,500 was paid to Benko for this to occur. And Fischer made the most of that situation by winning the interzonal, 3.5 points ahead of Bent Larsen, Efim Geller and Robert Hübner in joint second place. Taimanov and Ullmann also qualified for the candidate matches. This is the bracket from the candidate matches. Fischer beat Taimanov 6-0. Larsen beat Ullmann, Korchnoi beat Geller, and Petrosyan beat Hübner, who forfeited the match after 7 games because he was complaining of noise during the match. Korchnoi and Petrosyan did not have to qualify through the interzonal, they got into the candidate matches straight away. In the semi-finals, Fischer beat Larsen, again 6-0, and Petrosyan just beat Korchnoi by the odd point. In the finals, Fischer beat Petrosyan 6.5, 2.5. This is a picture from the candidates final, Petrosyan on the left, Fischer on the right, and in this video we're going to look at a game from that match. I analyzed this game when I was building up towards the first half of the candidates tournament, and to make this series complete I will repost that analysis.
Game 7 of that match. A battle on the chessboard between the USA and the Soviet Union. Fischer is white, Petrosyan is black. It is the 19th of October 1971. And Fischer was leading by 1 point, 3.5 against 2.5 before this game was played. Fischer opened with the e-pawn, as he always did. We see the Sicilian, knight of 3, e6, an open Sicilian, takes, and a6. To some this is called the Paulsen variation after the 19th century master Louis Paulsen. To others it is the Kan variation named after the Soviet theoretician Ilya Kan. Black is guarding all the squares where the knight from d4 would like to jump to. Bishop d3 developing, and here knight f6 is the main move, but Petrosyan plays the other knight. Fischer trades on c6, and Petrosyan takes with the b-pawn, taking towards the center. The d-pawn wants to go to d5, a common theme in the Sicilian. Fischer castled, and there is that move d5, getting a foothold in the center. And Fischer plays c4, also fighting for the center. As we see in many Fischer games, his play is strategically crystal clear, and this game is a very good example, as we'll see. Knight f6, and Fischer took twice in the center. And all 3 captures are possible here with the queen, with the knight or with the pawn. Petrosyan takes with the pawn and accepts the isolated queen's pawn position. This pawn is isolated, has no help from pawns on the e or c file. Fischer develops the knight, Petrosyan develops the bishop, and queen a4 check. Petrosyan interposed with the queen. Bishop d7 is the alternative. In general, black does not want to swap too many pieces. The more pieces come off the board, the more the weakness of the isolated pawn is felt. So queen d7 was criticized by some analysts. But who are we to criticize a former world champion? White can win material here, but Fischer does not engage in cheap theatrics, as FIDE master Eric Schiller writes in this book. I took many of his comments for this video. The book is called Learn from Bobby Fischer's Greatest Games. Yes, White can win material with bishop b5. And that is threatening to win the queen. The queen is pinned, so you have to take, and then the rook is hanging in a corner. But black castles, and we'll follow it up with bishop b7 and d4, and we'll have great compensation for the exchange. So Fischer does not go for these cheap theatrics or cheap tricks. He plays rook e1. He does not want to win the exchange. The queens were swapped, and bishop e6. Bishop e3 developing, Petrosyan castled, and now bishop c5, which Schiller calls a key move. When the dark squared bishops get exchanged, White can attack the isolated pawn from the side with his rooks, and we'll see that happening in this game. That's why Fischer wants to swap the dark squared bishops. Rook fe8, the bishops are swapped, and b4. And black, in fact, has 2 weak pawns in his camp. Not just the isolated pawn on d5, but also the pawn on a6 is a weak pawn. And the b2, b4 move sets up a knight move to c5, which will put pressure on the pawn on a6, with both bishop and knight. King f8 from Petrosyan, there goes the knight, and bishop c8, protecting the pawn. It's now protected twice with rook and bishop, so for the moment black is able to protect his weaknesses. And now what? How can White make progress here? Fischer plays f3, and as Eric Schiller writes, Fischer's plan is almost brutal in its simplicity. He wants to exchange rooks, march his king to d4, kick the knight from f6 and take on d5. That's the plan. Knight d7 was given by Grandmaster Yuri Averbach as an alternative to the move played in the game, but Averbach described it as the best of a bad bunch of options. Rook e2 a7 was Petrosjan's choice. Now comes rook e5, attacking the pawn from the side as promised. Bishop d7, and now an extraordinary move. Here Fischer took on d7, giving up that beautiful knight on c5. As FIDE Master Schiller explains in his book, the knight has done his job and now the domination of the open c-file is the main objective. And I can add that this is a good example of the saying that it's not important which pieces are being swapped off, it's important which pieces remain on the board. And Fischer has judged correctly that the white bishop is stronger than the black knight. Those are the pieces that will remain on the board. Rook takes and rook c1, threatening rook c6, which would be very strong. Petrosjan prevents that with rook d6. This rook is defending both weak pawns, but rooks want to roam free and not passively defend pawns. The rook on d6 is doing a job, but it would like to have more space. It would like to roam free and attack something in white's camp, for example, instead of just defending. Rook c7. Okay, says Fischer, I cannot go to the 6th rank, but now I can go to the 7th. And if the other rook can get there as well, black will be in real trouble. As we know, 2 rooks on the 7th rank are very, very strong. Knight d7 to prevent the other rook coming to e7. Attacking the rook on e5, the rook dropped back to e2. g6, king f2, and h5. Former world champion Michael Botwinnik suggested rook b8 as a better option with some chances for counterplay for black. He gave this variation. The b pawn is hanging, so a3, then a5, b5 and a4 with some counterplay for black. But as mentioned, h5 was Petrosjan's choice. And now Fischer played f4. A very precise move, says Eric Schiller, denying the knight the e5 square. h4 was played, king f3, improving the king's position, f5, king e3, Fischer is not in a rush, and here FIDE Master Schiller gives this variation, knight f6, then the king goes to d4, knight e4 and rook e to c2 with total control over the c-file, which is as important as the 7th rank, writes Schiller. White will set his queenside majority in motion while black's pass pawn on d5 is not going anywhere. It's firmly blockaded. So that after king e3 and a knight f6, but in the game Petrosjan played d4 check. King dropped back and knight b6. But now Fischer gets both rooks on the 7th rank. Rook e2 e7 and knight d5, which was played by Petrosjan, is not a real fork. It looks like it wins material, but it doesn't, because Fischer can save both his rooks, rook f7 check, king e8 and rook b7. Both rooks are out of reach of the knight, and it works tactically as well, as we'll see now, because it looks for a moment that Fischer has dropped an important pawn, and Petrosjan took it, knight takes b4. And you cannot take that piece, because then your rook on f7 is hanging. So did Fischer make a mistake? Did he drop an important pawn? No, he didn't. He had seen everything. He played bishop c4, and that decides the game. Petrosjan resigned here. The knight is now hanging on b4, as the rook is now protected. And if you save the knight, let's say knight c6, then there is rook h7, threatening mate with rook h8. So black plays rook f6. If rook h8, then the rook can interpose. And now it's up to you to find the mate in 3. How does white checkmate the black king in 3 moves from here? It's not very difficult, and it's nice to calculate this. Rook h8 check would come anyway. Rook f8 is the only move. But then the very nice move bishop f7 check. Wonderful move. Protected by the rook on b7. King d8 only move, and now the rook on f8 is not protected anymore, and this is checkmate. A typical Bobby Fischer game, simple maneuvers that you and I would play as well. The only problem is that if we try to play like Fischer, something goes wrong along the way and we lose. With this game, Fischer took a 2-point lead on his way to match victory and the right to challenge Spassky for the world title. He also won the next 2 games to decide the match, by 6.5 points to 2.5.
I hope you enjoyed this video and that you'll keep counting down towards the resumption of the Candidates Tournament with me. If you like the video, please give it a thumbs up, please subscribe to the Chess to Impress channel and please leave a comment. I will read them all and I will reply to them all. If you like the video, then please share it on social media by clicking the share button on YouTube. You can find me on Instagram, on Twitter and on Facebook. This is Rick for Chess to Impress. Thank you for watching.